Before we dive into the exciting world of React, let's talk about some prerequisites that will set you up for success in this course. To make the most out of this journey, it's essential to have a solid understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, especially for client-side programming. Basically, HTML forms the structure for your web pages, CSS adds stylings and visual appeals, and JavaScript brings interactivity and dynamic functionality to your applications. Knowing these fundamentals will not only help you grasp React's concept more easily, but also enable you to build powerful and responsive web applications. React is just a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, which means it builds upon the foundations laid by HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Without a solid understanding of these technologies, you might find yourself struggling to follow along the concepts we will be covering. So, if you're feeling confident in your HTML and CSS and JavaScript skills, you are ready to take your web development journey to the next level with React. Otherwise, I will highly recommend you to stop this video, go and have some basic tutorials about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript first, then come back and finish this one. Okay, so let's get started. Now let's look at the tools that you will need to work with React. So firstly, you need an editor. So if you're not familiar with what editor is, it's basically a program that can help you write your code. It's like, for example, you need an Excel sheet to make your tables, or you need a Word file to write your text. Same for coding, you need a tool where you can write your code, okay? So I'm using Visual Studio Code at the moment for writing my code. I feel it's so helpful and to have a lot of benefits when you're going more experience with development. It's just a lot of built-in tools and helpers for you. If you think this tool is too big and too much overwhelming, please feel free to find other ones just simpler and easier, and they have very simple interface. For example, you can use Sublime Text as well. It's also another editor tool that can help you write your code in it. So feel free to choose any one of these two. There are a lot of out there as well. So feel free to choose any one that you're feeling confident with. Okay. So this is a tool that you will need to write your code in. Okay. So for me, I'm using Visual Studio Code. As I said, I just downloaded it. They have Mac version, they have Linux version. So you can download the version that suits you the best. Okay. Now the next thing you will need is a Node.js to be installed on your machine. And for that, you just need to head to nodejs.org and then download the latest at the time you're watching this video. So all what it will do is just download it and to install, it will run and install on your machine, and that's it. Okay. Now, done with the tools, let's go to the React. So for React, before 2024, when React just started, we had to write a lot of code just to make our setup to get started. And why is that? Because React basically it's just an HTML and JavaScript, which basically our web will not understand, and you have to write some configuration that will translate your code into plain JavaScript that your browser will understand, which is so complex things that I don't want to go into for this beginner course. Lucky for you, now there are already boilerplates ready for you. You can just go and install them and get started. Okay. So the two biggest famous ones at the moment is you have Create React App, which was there from ages now. So you can just run a command in your terminal and it will just install a boilerplate ready for you. Or you can also use Next.js, okay, which is also a framework you can see here, which can help us also get started with a ready package. We can just go and get started writing our code as well. For today's video, we'll be using Next.js to get started. Just keep in mind, this video is purely React. We'll be learning everything about React only, nothing related to the Next.js itself, but we are just using it to get started with our project. Okay, so just keep in mind whatever you learn today will be applicable to any other framework you use for React, to any other boilerplate you use. Okay, so you can see in documentation, you can get started simple as you just run this command in your terminal. So I'll just copy that one. Okay, now let's get started. Let's get our project created. So first thing we need to create our boilerplate to get started. So npx create next app, then I'll say add latest, and add latest means I just wanted to install the latest version of my current time of recording. Okay, so when you are watching this video and you're doing so, you may have a different versions. So latest and space, and I will add my folder name. I'll call it my app, and let's say not even my app, just say app. You can call anything you want, and I'll hit enter. I did a mistake. Okay, so it's not npm, it's npx. Now hit enter, and as I hit enter, because it's a built-in boilerplate, it will ask me a few questions to help me go through my configuration easily. Okay, and because this is a full beginner project, I don't want to use TypeScript, I want to use only JavaScript. So I'm saying no. ESLint again, it just helped me to monitor my code and help me write a better code. This video is not about that, but I'll still keep it yes. In my next videos, I'll explain how that works. Taiwan CSS, basically it just a built-in library with ready classes to style. So I'll just say yes for this video, but I will not be using it really because I want to teach you everything about React. So I'll just say yes. Would you like to use SRC directory? I'll say yes. That's where I want to put my components. Would you like to use app router? Again, this is a full beginner course. I'll be covering app routers in my next videos, but it's just recommended. So I'll just keep it yes for default. It will not add any problems. And everything else, I'll just say no. So basically what we'll do is we'll just install all the npm packages I need to get my application started. Okay, now my packages are installed, so I can just do cd and I call my folder app, right? So I'll just do cd app to call my project. And now because I'm using Visual Studio Code, the biggest benefit of it is a lot of shortcuts. It can help you easily use it. One of them is just code dot, and that's basically I'm saying open my Visual Studio Code in this folder. As I hit enter, my Visual Studio Code will comes up and my project, I can see it full right here. Okay, now if don't be this overwhelming first time you're using Visual Studio Code, you can easily just go and open the Visual Studio Code. Okay, and you can go here to file and open folder, and then just put the route of the project where you want to go. Okay, and then just select folder and you'll open it for you. Okay, simple as that. Now I'll just close these and let's look at the structure of our application. Okay, so first thing is we have here this config, so please just ignore it. It's just because I add the Tailwind. I said yes, which is a built-in CSS library, something like a Bootstrap, if you know Bootstrap. So just ignore that one. The other things we have, which is more important, is the packages JSON, and that's all your configuration of your application is. And here you can see here we have dependencies, that's the things we're using. So of course we're using React, you need React DOM, which is another library to write your React code. And because we use the Next.js framework, so of course we have Next here as well. Now, the dev dependencies are basically other libraries you'll be using, but just during your development, and that's what they're called, dev dependencies. Okay, don't feel overwhelmed. All these things you don't need, and that's the benefits now of 2024. And maybe after, things are much easier. Okay, you don't need to know all these things. You just need to know how to get started. And during our course and next courses, you will get a better understanding on what these things do and how to get them configured for the best benefit of your development. Now, the other thing you see here is the scripts. So the scripts basically are the commands you need to run for some specific things. Okay, like dev command if to run your project locally in your machine and use it while developing. Building is to run the production version and build it for you so you can push it to production. Start if you want to run your locally but the production version locally. And lint, basically it just helps you to lint your code and make sure your code is clean. Okay, now the other thing you see here, the package.log, that's just generated from package.json. Okay, So there's nothing for you in there. We never touch it. Whenever you install your packages, this one gets updated. Okay. The other thing you have here is your next config, and at the moment it's empty and we don't want to touch it as well. Just because we're using Next.js, it has its own config file. The other thing you have here is ESLint.json as well, and that is configuration for ESLint that helps you to monitor your code, okay, and make sure your code is clean. Also here we didn't add anything yet because that's not the purpose of this video, but it just comes with the boilerplate we installed as well. So there's no use for add for learning as well. The other thing you see here is the node modules, and that's whenever you have an npm project and you install it, you'll have this node module generated which hold all these npm packages for you, okay, which also you never touch as well. It generates by itself whenever you install npm packages. Now the public folder is basically anything you need to access publicly, and your config does not run on top of it, doesn't rebuild it or anything, okay? So if you have any public assets, images or pictures that you want to access publicly, you may want to put them there, but again, that's not the conversation of this video as well, so we are not touching that. Now you have the source, and that's where everything is, and that's where you will be writing your React code, okay? But before I do that, let's enough talking, maybe let's run this one first in our browser and see what we have at the moment, okay? So I have in my Visual Studio Code, I have a built-in terminal, and I will use that. Otherwise, you can just use your machine terminal as well. And what I will do, I'll say npm, and we have access to this npm. Remember, we installed the Node.js on your machine. When we install it, it gives us access to something called npm, which helps us to run our applications. Now say npm run and then dev, and if you remember, that's the dev right there in our script, okay? And it will help us to run our application on our local machine. So npm run dev. We can see here it's starting in your local, in localhost 3000, okay? Now what I will do, I'll go here and I'll say localhost 3000. Now you must be wondering where all this came from. Okay, so as you can see here, I already given you a hint. So this, I get started by editing source/app/page.js, okay? So let's go to our project, and that is the one, source/app/page.js. So when I click this, you can see there's a lot of code here. And if you're new to this, it may look overwhelming, but trust me, it's just too simple. Basically, you have here a JavaScript thing. If you're familiar with JavaScript, it's a function. But the thing which is might be weird for your first time is you have in same file JavaScript, and also you have HTML code as well. And that is the cool thing about React, okay? It may be overwhelming, but trust me, you will love this, and you will love how much powerful it can be as well. So all what we are doing now is that we're just writing a function, and that function basically returns some HTML content for us, okay? So don't take me wrong when I say HTML. I'm keeping this is simple for you, but in future part of this course, then what it is, okay? So let's keep it in simple language at the moment. So you have a function which is returning some HTML for you. Now let me put these pages next to each other. I want to show you one more cool thing about this as well. Now let me make this one small, and let's just put them next to each other. Okay, now what I will do here, I'll just change the text here, okay? I will say here. Okay, now what I will do, I'll click save. And as soon as I click save, you can see here my text immediately changed in the browser. I didn't hard refresh or even anything by my actual cursor. It just happened by itself. And that is the amazing thing when you use the built-in frameworks. It has something behind the scene which is called hard reloading, okay? Which basically what it does is whenever you do a change in your code and you save, it will immediately hard reload and display your new change in the browser immediately. Okay, one more thing, let me explain you what this export means in the lane 4. So this export basically is not related to React. It is a pure JavaScript functionality. So if you come from a JavaScript development background, you'll be already have an idea what this does. But let me go to this one very quick. So export basically help us to create something called modules, okay? And what does modules for us basically? It's just their functions that we can access from other modules or other files in our project, okay? Now, for example, here this home, okay, it is just a function, but we are exporting it. We are making it available to all our application. We can go to any other JavaScript file and access this function. And how you can do that? You can just use something like you see in line 1 and 2. You just use something called import, okay? And don't worry, this will be looking maybe something weird in the beginning, but as we go into the course, this is how you do, that's how you create each and every piece of code in your React. And then it will be just a way of doing your work, okay? So now let's get started and let's clean up this because we don't need this. So what we'll be doing, we'll be building a simple application and that we will take from the friends and mentor. They have some challenges. Some of them are free and some of them are paid. So we're taking a free one to start with to learn in this video today. So first thing we have to do is just create a header. And good thing is that they have Figma file. And if you want to practice your styling and all that stuff, they have a full access, a free one to the Figma file as well. So I'll just zoom in. So this is what we'll be building. We will not do this much complex. We just have a header, which we'll have to do and a background image on it. And then beneath it, we'll have this list of to-dos. Okay. Now, let's go back to our code. So we have the page.js, that's the entry for our application. Okay. So what we will do, I'll just clean up all this and let's create our first component. Okay. So the way you do create a component in React, and if component doesn't make sense to you, React basically is based on a component. It's like you're building a Legos, okay? And you need a tiny Legos, right, to keep building on top of them. Basically, those tiny Legos or the Legos, bigger ones, they are those components, okay? So React basically follow this base of components. You build small pieces and then you call them inside of each other, okay? And this may sound a bit also confusing, but trust me, as soon you get a hand of it, it is really easy to do. So every component, every piece of your Lego, it is just simply a function in JavaScript. Only thing that function, it give us back something called JSX, okay, which is that HTML in JavaScript thing. Now, I start with const, okay, to declare, of course, my function. Then I have my function name. I'll just call it for now index, okay. Then we'll be using the new JavaScript, the ECMAScript, and I'll be defining my function using an arrow function style, okay. I'll not use a function keyword. So the way you do it is just like this. And now I have my function, okay? Now, as we said, the components in React return some HTML content, which is JSX. So you have to do return and whatever your HTML content you need to render, okay? Let's say for now, hi word. That's all I'm returning. Now, I created my function. If I go and try to look at my screen, I'll run localhost 3000. It says the default export is not in React component in page slash. And I hope by looking at this message, you know what we missed. So what we have missed is that we created it, our function, we created our component, but we did not create the export for it. Do you remember the mode we were talking about? Whenever you create a component, you have to export it to make it available to your application. So say export default. So by default, that's my export. I'll say index. Now let's go back to my browser. And there we go. I can say hello world. Now, the other point you may be wondering, how I export it, but I did not really call it from another file. That's because it was already done. We didn't add the page itself. The page was already there, right? We just clean it up and write it again, but has been imported somewhere else in our application. Okay, now let's create our first component. Should be just a header at the moment, and that header will simply have a to-do text in it, okay, and a background image. So let's start with creating this header component. So we'll go back to our application, and the way in the standard how you do it is that you create a component folder, and then you put all your small components inside that folder for better organization of your project. So I'll go in my source folder or add a new folder called component. Again, this is just a standard, but if you don't want to do so, you don't have to. And inside my components folder, I'll create my new component. I will call it header at the moment. So I'll create another folder inside called header. Okay. So one rule you have to keep in mind is that the name of your component always should start with a capital letter. Okay. Then you can call them anything you want, but just make sure the first letter it is a capital letter. Now, inside my header folder, I'll create a file where I'll write my component. It's called index, okay, then .jsx, okay. As I put JSX, you can see my Visual Studio Code is showing me this icon. It's telling me that this file will be for a React component. If I remove the X, then it will become just some simple JavaScript, okay. Put my X there and enter. So my file is created. Now I have to create my first component. So it will be simple. As I said, again, the component, I just take them like a functions in JavaScript. It's just the return type, which is a little bit different. Okay, to start with. Now you have to declare it, so const, and we'll be using the arrow functions. We'll not be using the function keyword, but we'll be using the new type of JavaScript functions. So they're called arrow functions. So const, I'll give the name, I'll just call it index, and it will be a arrow function. Okay. Now this arrow function I declared, all what will return for me at the moment is just a heading with to do or to do application. You can call your heading anything you want. So return, I'll say H1 for now. Now say to do application, for example. Okay. Then we created now our component. We have to make it available to all our application. So I have to export it. So export default index. So whatever name you give right there, you have to export it here, okay? And save. Now, even if I go to my application, it won't be there. We still see the old message we put in the first time in the page.js. And reason why is that because we didn't import this file in our page.js, okay? So you can't just create them. You have to import them within whatever the root component which is available to the browser. So at the moment in current boilerplate we're using, it is page.js. So I will just remove that text from there. Okay, I will say it is header. But again, I say it is header, but I didn't import it here, so I have to make sure I do import it. So import header from, and if you can see here, I have to jump one level up and then access components header. So slash components slash header, save. Let's go back to our page and there we go. You can see your to-do application right there, okay? Now, even for example, you must be wondering why you just point to the folder but not the file itself. Because I'm using the built-in boilerplate of Next.js, it's already handle this pattern where you can create the folder names for your components, and inside you just have to make sure you're using index.jsx if you're using JavaScript or index.tsx. So just make sure always you have that index, okay? So it will pick it up by default as the component for that folder which is in above it, okay? Now I can even do this slash index and save. And if I go back to my web application, you can see here it is complaining. And I think I did a mistake here, which I did. I removed the header. I should do slash header slash index. Go back and go back to my browser and still it will be working. Okay. It just for the readability of your components, I mean, you don't have to do this. Even this one is working, so less code, less text in your component, okay? So there we go. You have created your first component in React. So not bad, right? It's very easy. It's very simple, okay? Okay, now our component is created. We need to style it and start to look at make look more prettier and friendly. So I'll show you all the options or the most options you have in styling, and just so you know all of them. But again, each project and each place of working is different and they use different methods. Okay, so the first one is using a generic global CSS file, which is one file that you will create, and that file basically will be just .css file, and then you can add it to the root of your application. In my current recording, because I'm using Next.js boilerplate, so either I can add it in page.js or I can add it in the layout.js, okay? Which you can see here for me is already added right there. Now, what I can do, I can just remove this one from here because I don't need it. And I can just here and create some class. So let's try to style our heading, and let's just add a basic style. I'll say h1 color is white and background is black. Okay, just so we can learn the styling options, but actually styling as per Figma we'll do later. Okay, now I go back to my browser and we can see there it's the styling is applied. If we debug it, and you can see here that's h1 and my style is coming from layout.css. So even though it's a global CSS, but because I import it in my layout.js, it is acting as a different file name for me. Okay, and that's just because the way its Next.js is working. Now, this is the way you can do for a global styling, okay, which is not really highly recommended, but you'll be still seen to use, for example, to add some global things, for example, a font, font families, and font weight, and so on, okay? Now, the other approach is using styles that will load only for certain components that it needed, okay? Like in the one we did now, because we add a generic global CSS file, even all the CSS there they are in that file we don't need, they'll be also loaded in your application, which may and can impact the performance. And most of the time, most of the CSS there, you don't need it until some certain pages loaded or certain components are visible to the customer. So the best way to do it, they have many approaches again, but one of them is called the modular CSS. And the way you can do that, so I can go back, for example, to my folder where I create my components. I will add a new file and I'll just call it, for example, header.module.css. Okay, and what we'll do now, I will add a class here, for example, .heading, and I'll say that heading will have color white and background color is black. Okay, I'll delete the one here because I don't need this one anymore. And then what we can do, we create our module CSS. I'll go back to my component and I'll import that CSS. And you will not import it as a string, but you'll import it as an object in JavaScript. So import styles. These styles, you can call it anything you want from. And I have my file created in the same root of my component. So just there. Now we imported our CSS file as an object, and how we can apply this style to my HTML elements. Simple as you define a class name. So in JavaScript, in React, you don't use a class, a property name, but you use a class name, okay? Then it will not be equal to a string, but to an object. And then you can call styles in there, okay? Styles dot then the class name you have created right there, which is for me heading. Okay, so let's save this, go back to our browser, and there we go. You can see my style is applied. Okay, so double check is not coming from my global CSS. If you see the H1, you can see there is like a random style title is there. It's not the one really we created dot heading, which should be a heading only here, but it's different. Okay, and that is automatically generated for us when our builder or our Webpack is running behind the scene. So what it does, you can see here the structure is a header. Okay, that's the component from where you call it. Then your class name, and then some random number there. Okay, and if you see on the right side, that's our style is coming. Now, the good thing about this method is your CSS, if you have a huge component, a lot of CSS, it will only load that style when it is needed, okay? It will not load all the time with your application, even if it's that component is not on the screen, okay? So this is the benefit of using the module.css. There are other approaches as well which help you with this benefit, which called style in GSS. So basically, it is a way to write your styles within an object, and then you just use them again, same thing within your component. And one of the most famous ones and common ones from ages now is styled components. So that is a library they can use to build CSS in JavaScript. And you can see here with an example, and you understand why it is called like that. So basically, you just declare a constant, and then you use the style library with the elements of your HTML. Then you can apply the styles you want. Okay. The amazing thing is that all these styles also support the hover, for example, the active, the focus. Even you can check the properties of your component and do a conditional styling as well. As for this today course, because we are not talking about CSS, but just an overall idea about everything to get started, we will not be going in depth about this, but you should have really idea about all your options, and this is commonly used within all the projects in real-time world. And just maybe look at from my next videos, I'll be having a full tutorial on how to use these styled components. Here we go, you have few options on how to use CSS. Now the last one, or maybe it's not the last, but it's something to add on, is there are other options as well that you can use, which are the third-party libraries. Okay, so you have a lot of them, like Bootstrap, you have Tailwind CSS, there is something called Style, so many options which they give you built-in classes ready for you to use, and you can also build your own theme on top of those. So those, they are very easy, to be honest, to build in within your project. It's just for each library, a third library you use, of course you have to learn how to use it, how, what classes you have, how you can have their configuration done for your own projects, and so on. Okay, so again, this is a full other topic that we can't cover in today's video, but just option for you again to know how, what options you have for your styling. Okay, now let's go back to our project. So we have now our heading. Let's go actually and style it properly to a little bit look like the one we have in our Figma. Okay, so first thing, I need to get the image. So what I have done, I imported an image from my Figma file and I put it under my public folder. And then in my CSS, what have I done? I set it as a background image, and background size is covered so it fill full my H1 element. And then of course the color of my text was white in my Figma. And then I just add some padding. Okay, so I'm not doing any pixel perfect uh, designs for this course. I'm just showing you how you can add some style. Though this is not the best way, but this is an option to start with if you're just starting with React. Okay, now let's look at our UI, and there we go. So our text is white and we have the list, the background image set for us. Okay, now let's talk about something called props in React. So let's say, for example, that now we create a component called banner, right? And all what it does for us is just return us a banner with a text on it. Let's say we have another page, okay, which I want the same banner, only the text will be different. So thing come in your mind is that if you're using normal JavaScript, you use a same function, right? Because it's doing the same code. Only that function need to accept some arguments, okay? Same thing in React. So in React, props, which is short for properties, are used to pass some data from one component, which is the parent, to another, which is child component, okay? So think of them like a parameters that you pass to a function. So these props allow you to make your components more dynamic and reusable. So let's see how we can do this in our example now. So I'll open my Visual Studio Code. So currently we have this header component that we created, or the banner, right? But we call it header. Calling that header from page.js. Let's say, for example, you have another page. I don't have now, but for sake of demo, I want this header to display not this to-do application, but I wanted to say hello world, for example. Okay, so we can pass something here, which called properties, and you can call this property anything you want. But I highly recommend you to use always namings that make sense to you. Okay, so let's say, for example, text. Okay, that's the only thing I have there at the moment. And that text, you can assign anything you want as well, depending on what you need. But for the start, I'm only using for a plain text, which is string. And you can pass the text that you want right there. Okay, so let's say I want to say hello world. Okay, now I have to make sure that my header components can understand this property I passed right there. So I can go here, and you remember we declared as an arrow function because again, React components are just functions. I will pass my argument here. I will pass something called props. Okay. Again, you can call this anything you want. It's just standard ways of namings. So I'm using props. Okay. Now, if I come here, I cancel log my props, save, go back to my browser, open my console. I'll just hard refresh. So as I hard refresh, you can see here I have a console log, that's my props, and I have an object which I will call a property text. Okay, so that property text is coming from the property we passed right there from the page.js. Okay, let's for example I call this one heading. Again, I'll have same thing. I'll go back to my browser and you can see here that's the heading, okay, and that's the value. So what we will do, I want my code, okay, to read that heading and display it for me. So the way we can do it inside this to-do application, it will not be any more hard coded, but this component will be a reusable piece of code that will accept this heading property or string from a parent component all the time. So I can do props dot heading. Okay, click save, go back to my browser, and you can see here now I have hello world, okay, which is coming from my parent component as a property or a prop for my header component. Okay, so this is another way. Another thing you can do with prop is that you can destructure it. Okay, so which is can be really handy sometimes, so you can know what your component is expected. So instead of having a generic object name right there, you can literally write all the props manually. So I can come here and say heading, okay, inside an object, and I will just remove these props from here. I don't have it anymore. I click save, I go back to my browser and see it's still working. I'll even hard refresh and it is working right there. Okay, now another thing is, for example, let's say that we call this component somewhere, okay, and no one passed its heading value, okay, and you want to have always a default value to work for you in case if someone don't pass it on, okay. So you can come here, and when you pass this heading here in the props, okay, or the arguments, you can set it up there to a default value. I would say, for example, I'm missing, for example, okay? I'll save this, then I'll go to my page, okay? And I'll add another instance of my components. So when you have more than one level elements with HTML, then you can just do return like this. I have to do parentheses, and then you need a wrapper element. You only can have one child HTML element. So you can add one, okay? And then inside as many you want. So I'll add two, and one of them I'll remove the heading property. Okay, click save. So basically you can see here we have two headings. So I'm expected to see two headings in my UI. One should have the default text, which is I'm missing, and other one should have hello world. So let's save this. Let's go back to our browser, and there we go. I'm missing, and this is a hello world as well there. Okay. Okay, now let's see another scenario how you can pass down some properties. Let's say remove all this, okay? And let's say, for example, I want to pass down a more complex element, okay? Let's say I want to pass down a heading. and also some text with it as well, and maybe buttons and many other things. So you want to pass down full JSX elements, or maybe simplified and say HTML elements, okay? So what you can do is that you can have, as you have an opening, for example, div and closing div, an opening H1, closing H1, you can have an opening and closing of your component itself, which my example is the header, okay? So I have an opening and closing tag, and in between them, I can add whatever I want, okay? I can say word, okay? Now, how my comments will read this, okay? Now, with what we are passing, this will not read out, okay? And it's only displayed currently my heading, okay? So what we can do, this is a special keyword or special property you can use called children, okay? No, as an object as well. So children, and what you can do is that you can pass the children right there. And again, this is a reserved keyword. You can see we didn't pass any property here, okay? But children in any component refers to any elements or any things you add between the opening and closing tag of your component itself, okay? If we save this and go back to my browser, you can see, I can see the hello world, okay? Let me even add some more exclamation marks so it makes some difference for you. Go back, and there we go. Okay, so this is a really, really powerful one. It can help you to add as many complex JSX elements you want. I can do, for example, like this too. Okay, render for me a H1 with hello world, and render for me also some p tag with description. This is my short description. And also I can render anything like a button, okay? Click me. So anything you want, basically, okay? If I save this and I go back to my browser, you can see everything is passing right there. And my components are reusable. My main feature now is just the background image, but you can see that you can do a lot of things with this children property, okay? Just make sure this is reserved keyword, so you can't go here and do something else with it. You can't go and do children equals something, okay? And then you do some different things with it. Children is a reserved prop keyword in React, okay? And that's what all it means. It just means whatever content you add between your opening and closing tags of your components, okay? Now let me end all this. And let me actually show you something else as well. As before, we said this is a structure. You can also just do props as well, or you can call again anything you want. But whatever you call here, which is props now, you can access again the children with props.children. Okay, and you can save, and you can see my component is rendering. Again, my favorite way is always do the structuring. It just helped me when I look at the component to know what properties it is expecting. So I just stick to it usually, and I keep always my components properties this structure. Okay. Now let's put back what we had before, because I don't need that. And just put back this as well. Save. Okay, now let's go to the next part where we have to render a list of to-dos. So basically this list, we already should have it, which should be an array of some elements, okay? So we'll see how we can map through that array and render this list here, okay? Which means we're still in the statics, okay? Now let's go back to my project. I'll create a new component which call to-dos, because this is a list of to-dos, okay? And I'll create my index file there. And because I'm using Visual Studio Code, I have a shortcut to generate for me the arrow function for my components. But again, it's the same thing. You're just declaring your function or your component, give it a name, which should be always a capital, starting first letter, and then it returns some JSX or an HTML content for you. Okay, so at the moment, I need just to add a mock for my list of to-dos, an array. So I'll just copy it from somewhere. I'll just mark it here. So data, and I'll call it an array, and this is the list, okay? So basically it's just a list of some to-dos, and that to-dos have an ID, a title, and also completed, if it's completed or not, Okay. Now, what we want to do is we want to render a row or a lane which give me the title and also the status of completion too. And maybe to start with, let's just display for title for now, then we'll enhance it later. So what we have to do is we can go inside our return function, okay? And then let's say also I want to add some subtitle, of course, for example, okay? I just want to show you how you can have multiple elements in your return function, okay? So I'll say it's h4, my current to-dos. And then now what we have to do is we need to map through our array, okay, of data, or let's call it data, okay? So we have to map through this array. And what we want to do is that whenever we are on element, I want to display this title in my UI, okay? So the way we can do that is very simple and easy. First, you start with your curly bracket to access your variables in your React, okay? I'll say datas. Then I'll use something called map, which is a function, and it's not specific to React. It is a JavaScript function, okay? Which help you map through your array of elements and access each and every element in it, which currently we have objects, okay? So map, and I'll say to do, oops, and I'll say to do, okay? And this to do you can call it anything you want. But for me at the moment, each time I'm mapping to this data, this to do will be one of these elements right there. Every time it's taking a loop, okay? So of course we loop them through order. So first it will be this to do, then this to do, okay? So what I will say whenever I map, every to do I want to access the title and display it from in my UI. Okay, so let's go back to our map. So it will accept an arrow function taking to do as argument, which is one element in my array. And then I want h5 for now at the moment, and inside to be curly brackets so I can access my variable to do. Okay, so to do dot title. Let's click save and let's go back to our UI, and it's not working. I still can only see my h1, which is my banner. And the reason why is, as you may have maybe understand it by now, is that we create our component, we make it available to our application, but we didn't import it anywhere. So I know at the moment my parent component is the page.js. That's where I render my header. In the same level, I want to render my to-do list. So I'll say to-dos. Okay, that's my folder, my components I named. Okay. So I close that, and I also have to import it, of course. So I'll just copy this and paste it right there. Save, go back to my UI, and there we go. Okay, so we have my subtitle. I added my current to-dos, and then I have my list of to-dos. If you remember, I had 4 elements in my array, so I have 4 titles rendering right there. Okay, now one more thing is that before we move forward is remember when we said that we need to have only one parent element? So always your components will only have one parent, okay? You can't have siblings rendering together. See, as I do that, my file is complaining is full red, okay? Because you can't do it. And you can see JSX expression must have one parent element only, okay? So we can't do that. So for this rule, because of this rule only, sometimes we have to add extra elements only to wrap up everything else, okay? Which means if you go to your UI, I'll just go type your components, okay? So imagine, of course, in real-time applications, you have a huge applications and so many components you're building, and you'll be taking them everywhere and reusing them everywhere. So many times you'll end up with so many nested levels, which are for no reason, only because React allow us only one parent child for a component. So the way you can do it, you can fix this, and React give us a very powerful things which call fragments. So if I do React, let me just write this one, React dot fragment, and I'll come here as well and do it. That will be my closing. So this one, what it does basically, it is an element, but it's not a real HTML element. And all what it does, it just wrap, but in the actual source file, there will be nothing there. Okay, so if we save and go back to our source file, you can see here now, we have our H1 dependent, and immediately the other children's in my component, which is H4, then H5s. So you don't have any other parent level there. Okay, now For clarity of your code, for readability, again, you have now extra a lot of text in your component, which if your component is big, of course, means harder to read. React also have a shortcut for this, so you can just remove the React fragment, okay? And you keep it empty. Amazing, right? In normal HTML, you can't do this, okay? This is just related to React. So you can do something like this. If you need a wrapper which doesn't have any styling, is not used for anything, it's just there because you need one parent uh, element in your component, then you can do like this, okay? So it's wrapping your elements, but again, I save it, I go back to my UI, I don't have any extra um, level here, just in the sake of wrapping my component, okay? Which means, again, no more nested elements for no reasons and better performance for your bigger applications. Before we move a little bit forward, I just did a little bit basic styling. So our app is a little bit appealing to our eyes while we are studying. So I just took from this video the first approach to do that one very quick. So I add some styles in my global.css file. So I just add some basic styling right here. Okay. And then what I have done in my to-dos, I just add some those classes right there. Okay, so we use class name to add those classes, and then our styling is working perfectly. Now, one more thing is, let's see how we can do some conditional styling in this step. So as you remember, our data have a completed property, which either is false or it is true in my last one here. So what I want to do is that when my item is completed, I want to have a background of green and also just do a cross on top of it, okay? So what I have done, I added a class here called completed, which have a text decoration line through, okay? And also I have a background color for completed class as green, okay? Now, how we can add this conditional class name in our class here, okay? So what you can do, you can here, we don't have the brackets, but we have these special ones. And what we can do is we can have our normal class, which is to do item, right? And then we will have a condition here. If my completed attribute is true, add the class completed. Otherwise, don't add the class completed. So what you can do, you can do $sign, then curly bracket, then say if my to do, so my current item dot completed, if it is true, okay, then add a class of completed. Otherwise, just an empty string, which means nothing. Okay, so this is how you can add a conditional styling for your component. Let's save this. Let's go back to our browser and then you can see. Okay, when I hover, because we have a hover style, it's gone. But as I don't hover, you can see my title is straight. There's a strike through it, and it have a background color of green. Now, let's talk about when you're doing mappings in React. So when you're doing mappings, you need to have the parent components assigned a property which is called key. Okay, and this is like an ID, an unique identifier for your components. Okay, and usually you have to give it something which is very unique. Currently, our items have IDs which are unique for each item, so I will use that for now. But let's say, for example, if you don't have a unique thing assigned to your component, you can use, for example, the index of the item in your array, okay? But this one is not recommended, it's not safe. Mostly if your array change the position of its items through the life of your application, okay? So you can use index like this as well. Okay, but again, this is not really recommended way of doing it. But if you don't have any options and that's the only way to go with it, again, it is fine as well. Now, why we use this key? So the reason why I use this key is that when you have, for example, in our example here, we have a list of to-dos, right? Our React go through this array and map through them. And let's say I go and add a new item. Let's say I have an input field and add a new item to my array. Okay, so what you're expecting from your React, you'll expect that it will go and add that new item to your UI, okay? But don't go and render again whatever it has been there before.
And without this key, React will not know what has been there before or not, okay? So basically, this key help your React application to know what things are new and what things need to be updated and what things they don't need to. Okay, so that's why it's like a unique identifier, and it has to be unique in your application. And imagine you have, I don't know, a page with thousands of items and you're adding something to them. Of course, you don't want your React component to go and re-render behind the scene all those 1,000 things only because you add an item to it. Okay, it will have a very bad impact on your application performance. And also when you have other usage as well, like scrolling events and all that stuff, it will get lost, okay, if your component re-renders behind the scene. So strict rule, whenever you have a mapping in your React application, whatever parent component, the first element, which is wrapping whatever else inside, that one should have a key and should have a unique property, as a unique value assigned to it as well. Okay, now let's see something else about React. Basically, it is easy to use because it is a UI or component-based application, which means is that every piece of your UI, you have to write it its own component, okay? Which make it easy to use, easy to read, and also easy to debug and test as well, okay? So what that means for us? At the moment, we have a very simple component, which is just a to-do list, okay, or to-dos, which render for us a list of to-do. And all what we're rendering at the moment is a title only, okay? But let's say in the future of this video, we'll be having also like a checkbox, so you can switch between completed and not completed. So you'll need a new HTML element or new JSX there for you, and so on. So it can be very complex. There's only a list or one item in your to-do. So the best thing to do is to create a new component that only renders that one single item of your to-do. Okay, so let's do that together. And we'll go to our component folder and I'll create a new folder called to-do item, okay, which means one item in my to-do. Then create my index file. And I'll use a shortcut I have in my Visual Studio Code to generate for me arrow function quickly, and I'll call it index. Okay, so again, same thing. You are just declaring a component, which is again just a function, and returning a JSX for you. Okay, then we're exporting the default.com. Now, what I will do, I will just copy at the moment whatever I have here, and I'll just paste it right there. Okay, now few things you see here is that we have a dynamic data rendering. We're using something to do from our map. Okay, so how our component will know how to read those details, right? So if you remember from the props section, so you use the props for this. So I'll have a property here called to do. Again, this one, call it anything you want, but whatever you call here should be the one you're using when you import your components. So I'll come here, I'll say to do item. And again, we'll just use the same property we called here, which is to do, and it should be equal to my to do, which is here in my map. Close. Okay. Now we have this one here, and the key we should not be using now anymore here because it's a single component, but should be directly used in your mapping. So we'll have a key added right there. Okay, so key to do.id. Okay, now let's save this and see if this is working. Let's go back, and you see it's erroring out. Okay, and the reason why is because my component, so I have to go and import it from my to-do item. Okay, just simple like that. Now let's go back to our UI. Okay, so all what we have done is just we created a different component which will hold for me one single row only. Okay, so we have a component for the whole list, then we are mapping, then we have a component that takes care of each item separately. Okay, which will be very handy for us later when we're working also in states. Now that is done. There are different ways you can pass this prop. So now we pass like a one single prop, okay? and then we access it there. Then we say, okay, to do dot completed and to do dot title. When you have more things, you have to again to do dot whatever other attributes you have. There are other approaches as well you can do to pass the properties. Let's see a few of them. Like for example, I can destruct this property right here. I'll say completed, and we have title. Okay, then you can come here and remove to do dots, which means your code will be less complex and more readable. I click save and go back to my UI and see it's still working. Okay, which is perfect. Now, this another approach is that you can, for example, pass that directly the completed and title without having an extra layer of your object. Okay, so you can pass it just like this, and you can come back here, and instead of having to do, you'll have now completed and title. Okay, so we can do like this. So completed equal to do dot complete. Okay, and this completed property here, it's same the name we are using right there. Again, the title, same. We can do same thing. We can do title equal to do dot title. Okay, and this one also will still work perfectly as well. Okay, now this one can be a bad practice if you have, for example, a big list of properties you're passing down, so your components will be difficult to read and maintain as well. So there's a shortcut for this, which you can do simply just by destructuring your actual object, okay? Which is just 3 dots and then to do. So basically you're destructuring whatever items. What I'm doing like this, now I'm passing extra things. I'm passing also the user ID, and also I'm passing the ID down to my child component, even though I don't need them. It's still working, but I'm passing extra properties that I don't need at all in my component, okay? So if you go back to my UI, this is also working. Now, the downside the downside of this approach is that you'll be passing down so many properties, and maybe you have bigger components which have a lot of other properties and functions and complex things. You'll be also destructuring them, then passing in them down. And maybe now it looks like nothing, but trust me, in real-time applications, that can be a nightmare and can impact your performance of your application. So for me, the best thing I try to stick to for now is always passing the whole object instead of trying to destructure it and then pass it down. So I'll keep it for now in this. The same thing, I have to refix my to-do item and just redo to-do property and also access it. Click save. Let's go back to our UI. And let's go back to our UI and this. Now let's look at the next term or next thing in our React learning. It's called state. And what is state? Basically, state is like something like a magical box where you can store some data and change it as well whenever you want to. So up to now, we're able to have something called props, which help us to pass data down from a parent to child component. But we said you can't change it, okay? So for example, now we have this list of to-dos and we have the completion, okay, and we can't change it at the moment. So what I have done is just added a checkbox so it can help us to do it, but now you can see it's not working. Okay, so to make it work, we have to make a use of something called state, right? And likely for us in React, in the new version of React, you have a built-in hooks. Well, the hooks basically that just function again. So there is a built-in hook called useState, which help you to make a state, store it, and manipulate it whenever you want to. So let's not do a lot of talking and let's jump direct into the code. Okay, so this is our row that we create or our item we create for to do. Okay, and we have now an input field for a checkbox. So what I want to do is whenever I click or I change my input checkbox, I want to be able to toggle the completion status. Okay. So to do that, first we have to create our state where I will store my completion value and then change it. Like I said, you can't change your props. So we go here first, we import a hook called useState. Again, for a minute, if you need more details and more depth learning about useState, I have a full React hook playlist which talks about all React hooks, and one of them is useState. Now we import the useState, and this useState again is a hook, is a function, but there are a few rules you need to stick with that when it comes to the hooks. The first rule is that you can call them only inside your function component. I can't call it outside here, okay? Only can call it inside. Okay, so use state. And this use state accepts an argument which is a default value of whatever state you're creating. So I'm creating this box. I want you can keep it empty initially, or you can add something default inside. For now, I want this state. I know it will be manipulating the completion for me. So I want to store the one coming from properties for my to-do item as default one. So I'll say to-do dot is dot complete. Okay, so that will be default value of my state. Now this function, this gives us back an array. Okay, so this array have two objects or two values thing. So the first one is your actual state, whatever state you have, and you can call it anything you want. I will call it is complete. The second one, it will be a function that will help you to change your state. It will help to change its values inside this magical box you create. Okay, and always it starts with set and follow it with anything you want. But for me, I always follow a pattern, set, then the name of my actual state. And why I do that is that when I have a bigger applications, you can have many states in one component, and then it will be easy for me to know when I see a setter function called somewhere, I know it is which state it is handling. Okay, so I keep these naming conventions following the same rules. Okay, now I created my state, which taking default value is complete want to do. Now, what I will do, all my elements here will not be using anymore the completed from the props. It should be using the ones from the state. So I'll go remove them. And there we go. Okay. If you see our UI, it should still working as it was before. Okay. Nothing's changing. But whatever completed is crossed and checked. And whatever not completed, it's still not checked and not crossed. Okay. Now let's make this work. So how it will do is that I want whenever I check my checkbox, then I want to toggle completion status. So of course I need an event here, go on change. You can see this on change is camel case. It's not like normal HTML, which is all lowercase, but in JSX it is camel case. Then I can create my function. That will be another function. And all it will do for me is just call this setter function because I want to change my state. And I know whatever I will be changing is just applying opposite of my current state, or what I have to easily adjust this. Okay, whatever opposite value. Let's click save and let's go back. Let's go. Let's go back to our application working. Okay, very easy, very simple. Now, there are different ways of doing things. Like, for example, I hate and I don't like this way of having inline function. Usually, I'll create a different function. Okay, I'll say, for example, toggle. It will be an auto function. And then whatever I'm doing here, I'll just do it right there. And then I will call this function here. Again, everyone have different preferences, but for me, this will make it more readable. And also, when you start looking at performance side and you have different events handlers working on your components, it may cause some performance issues, which I can't go in depth in this video. Maybe in my coming uh, series, we should talk more about React. But this is the best practice you can do, okay? If you can avoid declaring inline functions, just avoid them. Like it's better to not use inline stuff, okay? Now let's double check that this is still working. I will check and it's working. Okay? Okay, before we move a little bit forward in this course, you need to learn a basic tool, which is a mandatory actually one. Any React developer should be knowing how to use this tool and be using it while developing. And this tool called React DevTools. So React DevTool. And that is an extension from the web Chrome. Okay, so you can go ahead and add this extension. For me, it's already installed. So please feel free to add it to your Chrome browser. When you do so, you might have to close your Chrome and then run it again so it can pick it up for you. So when that's done, you can, for example, close this. I'll do from beginning. So you can just click if F12 or right click and go to inspect. So as you have your elements and consoles, you have now two new tabs. The first one is component tab, and that's going to help you to debug your React component. As you have inspector of your HTML, this is kind of inspector for your React component. For example, let's say I want to inspect this component. Okay, see the name, what is it? It's index. And the reason why is because our components here, I'm calling them index. So maybe that's a good thing if you can call them meaningful names. So it can help with debugging. So you call them index. I'm expecting this index to have a property called to do and also to have one state, which is a hook within that. So I can easily debug that in my browser. So when I find my component, I go to the props and I can see it have a prop here to do, and I can see the values in that property for me. Same thing for the hooks. You have a hooks section, and it lists for you all the hooks used within your that component. And at the moment, only have one. The bad thing for it until now is that it doesn't pick up the name of your state. It just tell you what type of hook it is, okay, and the value of it. So for now, the first one it is true, so it is showing this one as true because we changed here, we selected, okay, so it's not same as the property at the moment. So whatever current state it is, it pick it up for you. Now let's say I want to see the parents of these children here. I can go one level up, and that is my to-do component, if you remember, and which is this one, okay, the to-dos. And those to-dos also have one state but have no property, okay? So if I go back to my browser, that to-do, so props, there's nothing, and hooks, there's only one hook, and that is a state which accepts an array of objects, okay? And I can see all the values within my state as well. So one thing can be very handy when you have big applications and very complex interactions, and sometimes you have bugs and issues. So it helps you to find the values passing down, for example, between parents and children and so on. Okay. Now the other thing is the profiler. And profiler, as it sounds, it helps with profiling your application. Means knowing the performance of your application, how much time it takes for component to render, how many times it how many times it rendered behind the scene, why it rendered, and so on. Okay. So one thing I do when I add this extension every time to any browser I have is that I do a few things in the settings. So you can click this setting icon here, and I do highlight updates when component render. I do tick it. Okay. And also I make sure I have all these ones ticked as well. And in the profile, I make sure you record why each comment render as well. This one is ticked too. Okay, so every comment renders, just make sure you are profiling it as well. Okay, now let me show you how this profiler works. Let's say, for example, I want to see my components, which ones render behind the scene when my application render first time, and also how many times they render. To do that, I can click this icon here, which reload and start profiling at the same time. So let's click this and I stop profiling. And you can see here, tell me it rendered 3 times. I'm more interested at this one because the one on the top, that all the templates and the error handling built in Next.js, which I don't need them. So this is my to-dos component and interested at, and this is my children component. Okay. So if I click that one, then I go through the comments. I can see it didn't render behind the scene in the second comment. It just a side effect of Next.js. And the third one also, it didn't re-render behind the scene. It just side effects again of the hard reloading. So I'm happy with this. That's why my comment only rendered first time. That's it, which is expected at the moment. And also if you hover, you can see the duration and also the reason why it rendered. And if you click it, you can see the details on the right side for you. Same thing for children. If I hover, it tells me again the duration and also why it rendered. And if I click it, I can see the details as well on the right side. So this debugging and profiling is a huge topic. I'll be making a full tutorial about it. I'll just go into a few steps in this course. So it helps you to get started. But the deep details on how to use them, they are a full topic alone. So we'll not be going in depth in this course. Okay. Now I will close all this and let's profile one more thing. Okay. I want to know when I click this tick, I want to make sure that only this component is rendered behind the scene. I don't want anything else to render. So let's see if that's happening. So I click the record icon and click this checkbox, okay, and stop profiling. And I can see only one comment has happened, which is great. This is my to-dos component. It didn't render. It's great. The other children component also didn't render, which is great. only the one I change, it rendered. And if I hover on it, it tells me also the duration, and also it says why did this render hook one change. Okay, if I click that, you can see the details here, which makes sense because in our app, when you do the checkbox, you are changing your state, which is a hook in React. Okay, and it is the hook number one. And that's one rule why we have, this rule about hooks in React, that you have to use them in order, and you can't have them within a conditional statement, because the React look at them in order all the time whenever you component re-render behind the scene, and that order have to be always the same. Okay, if I have another state in my component, it should be always, if it's second, should be always in any re-render second running on. Okay, so that's how it pick up the numbers of the hooks for you. It's picking them up by order they are in your code. Okay, so that's how you can use this profiler. So that's that. If I click this checkbox, you'll see a highlight around it. And that's telling you basically that component re-render. Okay. For example, let's say if I click this and you see a highlight around that and you're not expecting it, that's mean a red flag for you. Okay. That's when you have to look at it. So that's why those settings I show you here, which is in general, that's the one showing you that line around the component should re-render behind the scene. Great. Now let's do the state. And let's say, for example, we want to have a button in our application here that when you click, it will add a new item to your list. Okay. And if you're thinking about the structure of our current simple application, that means our button should be somewhere here. And that will trigger the set to dos because we want to update this list so we can see the new item here. Okay. So definitely we will not be adding a button here and changing the state here, because that's related to one item only and not on the whole list. To-dos component, and let's add up our button, just add our list. So it's really just basic native HTML button, and you'll have events called onClick. And you can see here, it's not the same as HTML, you just have click and everything is lowercase. Here in React, you use camel case namings for the properties. So the C is capital only, then the function. Okay, you can define whatever you want to do right here and write whatever code the function will do for you. But I don't like this way of writing the functions. So I like to declare them and use them. Let's call it handle add item. I have to define now this function. So I'll come this after my state. So it's still inside my function component. And let's declare my new handler function. And this will be an arrow function, which is in our case now doesn't take any arguments for it. Okay. So what you want to do, first let me close this button. Say add new item. So what I want to do when I click this button, I want to add a new list. So as I said before, I will not be creating a form, anything that will be in a later chapter of this course. For now, I'll just hard code the item. Okay. So basically what you want to do, add new item, which means we need to update our state. Okay. Which means you need to call the setter function for this state itself. Okay. So let's trigger our set to do. And what we will do inside the set to dos, first we want to do set whatever previous state we have, we want to keep it. Okay, so array again of previous to dos. Okay, comma, which is this one, right? Whatever previous to dos, we are destructuring them. Our array means we want to keep them. Then add the new item, which should be again object. And for now, I'll just hard code. So I'll just copy an item from here and I'll paste it right there. Yeah. And let's click save. And I have some errors here, which means I'm just missing some. So I'll remove these and there we go. So all what we're doing at the moment is that when we click, we are setting the state with whatever previous state is there and adding a new item here, okay? And previous one we had 4 items, so now we're adding 5th one. So I'm adding ID as 5. I can add here a title. Let's say subscribe to this channel, as I know many people they're watching on this video, they're not subscribed. So please make sure you subscribe to this channel to get updated with all latest tutorials regarding the front end and even future AI tutorials as well. So in title, subscribe to the channel. It's not completed, and let's save it. And let's go back to our UI. There is our new button now. So if I click, I can see my new item getting added there. So my functions is working properly. Let's do some profiling as well. Okay, I will inspect, I will hard reload, I will start from fresh. I want to go to profiling. So I want to see that when I add my new item, by mind, by some logic, you'll realize or no, you'll expect that your parent component, which is to-dos, okay, it should re-render because you added a new element to your state, okay? And also I'm expecting this element to not re-render behind the scene because I didn't actually update the properties of these items. I didn't go and change the actual data within here, okay? I just added a new one to it. And I'm expected for this one of course to re-render because it will be first. Now, let's start recording. Click add new item and I'll stop recording. And let's start profiling. So let's go down, down, down. Let's click here. So that's my to-dos, okay? So that's my component. So that is re-rendering. And if you see the why this rendered, because hook number one changed, which is correct. This is the hook number one in my list. It has changed. Now, the other thing I can see is that all the children have re-rendered as well. Okay, it's not only the item I added, but also the other children. Okay, and when I hover, it says because the parent component re-rendered, that's why these children also re-render. Okay, somehow it makes sense. In most of the scenarios, you don't want that to happen. Okay, so how you can stop this from happening? There is something in React which is called Memo, okay, which is a hook. And that memo helps you or helps your components to do a shallow comparison, okay? So what we'll do, let me close this header components and go to our to-do item. So what we'll do, it will compare, shallow compare the previous properties to the current. If it finds these properties are different, then it does the re-rendering again for you. If they are the same, it will prevent it from re-rendering. Okay, this is a basic understand of it. You can look at in depth in my channel for a full video about actually how this memo works. Okay. Now, in the future versions of React, that will be a built-in functionality for you. You don't have to add this wrapper memo at all. But as always, it's always too good to know all the concepts and all the scenarios because even if the new versions of React have this functionality built in, which is still not yet actually released, it's still in the beta version. When you join in existing companies, you'll see this code there, right? And you have to know really why it is there, okay? Like until now, I still in some projects when I join, I can still they're using, the old versions, which are still using class components, which really should have disappeared like almost 3, 4 years ago, but they are still out there. And if you don't have understanding, you'll not know how to refactor them, okay? So but let's now use the memo and see how this can help us to prevent this wasted rendering we have now. So it's very simple. I can go and import memo from React. Okay. And then here I have some extra thing here. I'll remove it. So in your export defaults, I will wrap my function name with a memo. Okay. Simple as that. There are deeper usage, but I will not do in this course because this is a full beginner course. So this is very enough to start with. So I'll click save, okay? And now I will go back to my UI. I'll hard refresh and then clean up my console. And let's profile again with this change. Click start, add new item, stop profiling, let's stop that now. Let's open this. There we go. So that's our to-do component, okay? The to-dos one. And you can see the previous one didn't re-render behind the scene, okay? Which is what is I'm expecting now. So you can see here you have index, it's right with memo, and it's grayed out. So this is really amazing. And you may think, okay, this is nothing, these components are tiny, they don't take time. But in real-time applications, in real-time scenarios, you will have so many small pieces of code, so many components in your application, and each one, if you just type, sometimes it will re-render so many other ones. Okay, and those things can impact hugely on your application. Every small piece of change or small piece of performance issue can cause a lot of problem in your application. So if you build a habit of profiling while you're developing, your application will always be smooth, and also you to be able to help you to avoid some bugs that can turn out into a tech debt items in your application, which will be really difficult to solve in the future. So we are done with that. Let's move to the next topic. Now let's talk about side effects in React. In React, side effects basically are operations that can affect something outside the scope of the function being executed, similar to updating your DOM or fetching data from an API or even logging to the console. So here useEffect hook in React comes very handy and help us to perform this side effect in function components. So let's see how we can use this use effect in our application to fetch this data from an actual API instead just hardcoding our application. We will use the JSON placeholder again to access this list of APIs. So we have something here with slash to do, which give us the list of to dos. Okay. So that is the API endpoint we'll be using. Now let's come back to our components. So we'll be using a hook, as we said, from React, which is called user. Then we come inside our functional components, which if you remember the rules of the hooks, you only can call them inside your functional components. Okay. So after the state, okay, let's handle now side if. And I'll come here, I'll call my use effect hook. Again, the hooks are there just functions again. And this hook accepts a first argument, which is a mandatory, it is an arrow function. Okay. And this arrow function, basically inside you can run whatever code you need to run to handle the side effects. The second argument is optional and depends of what you need, okay? And it's called array of dependencies. So what is array dependencies? It means, for example, now I give an empty array. It means that this user will only run the first time when my component's mounted, okay? So I do not run any other time when my component re-enter behind the scene. To make it run behind the scene, for example, if you want to listen to any prop change or any state change, you can add those properties or states here. So for example, I add to-dos here. That means this use effect will run every time my to-do state change, okay? If you have a property here and you want this use effect to run every time this property change, you can run that, you can pass this property name into the array of dependencies. The use effect in depth. I have a full tutorial on React Hook's course playlist in my channel. So feel free to check it out and learn React Hook in details. Okay. So in our scenario today, we only want to run this use effect the first of my component run because I want to fetch the list of data. Okay. Now I'll come here. I will try to access my API. So const response. Okay, await to be assigned. So I'll use normal fetch JavaScript function to fetch the API and I'll paste the endpoint. Okay, now as soon as I write await, it's complaining. And the reason why, because of course await you call it within an async function. Unfortunately, useEffect does not handle async calls directly, but there is an easy workaround, which is to declare a function inside your useEffect that you can use for triggering this API call. So I can come here, say const, or call my function fetch to-dos, okay, and to be an arrow function, and to be a async arrow function. Okay, then I'll paste this lane inside my new function line. Okay, now again, I will just try to access the actual response JSON. So I'll say my to-dos equal await response dot JSON. And we got the data back now from our API. So what we'll do with it, we'll just keep it there? No, we want to set it in our state, okay? And don't use any more this dummy data here. So I'll remove this. I'll remove that. I will give a default value to my state as an empty array in the beginning. And when I get my data back, I'll say set to-dos to my new data, okay, which is coming from my API. Okay, now I declared my function. Now I just need to trigger it. It's still inside my user. Okay, let's click save and let's visit our app. There's a console and there we go. So all this list is coming now from API instead of hard coding, okay? And that's where the useEffect comes very handy. So fetching API details doesn't side effect your component. So you have to call it within your useEffect, okay? Now, some of you might be asking why we don't trigger this function from outside, okay? Why we don't declare it outside. We can, if you want to use this one somewhere else, you can do it. But if you're pretty sure that this function, you'll not use it anywhere else, so there's no harm in keeping it inside your use effect as well, okay? So for me, I know for now, for this demo, I'm not using it anywhere, so I'm just keeping it this. Now let's run our profile as well. Let's keep it a practice. And open up profiler, hard reload and profile, stop it, and let's open this one big wide. Okay, so our component should be down here somewhere, and that is our component there. That's our header, and this is our component. So the first comment it says because the first time the component rendered, the second time it's nothing there rendered, it's just a comment. Third one it's just a hard reload. Then you have the third, fourth one, so fourth of the five. The fourth comment were actually all your components and re-rendering. Okay. Then the fifth one, which is now let's look at conditional rendering and how we can conditionally show some components and hide others and so on. Also a simple demonstration for our example today. So you remember we said add new item, we are not showing a form, it's just hard coding. Now let's actually show a form. So what I want to do is when I click add new item, I want to hide my list, show a simple form to add my new item, and with the my new item added, then hide the form and show my list again with the new item. Okay, so first thing when you are thinking about this process is that when you click add a new item button, we need to be able to know like how or when to show the form and when and how to show the list, which means we need some state that can track that for us and we can listen to. Okay, so let's define a new state const. Okay, and that will be a new state. So this new state, basically, I need to declare the state name and also the set of function. So what I will say is, no, I'll say show form, okay, as my state and to be Boolean. And I need a set of function called set show form. And the initial value will be false. Okay, so that's good there. Now what I want to do is, let me move this button first on the top. So what I want to do now, instead of hard coding, let me remove all this for now, just comment it. And what I want to do when I click my add button, okay, I want to switch the state value, okay? And I want to switch the state of the show form. So I'll say set show form to true. Okay, so now what we did, we clicked the button, so we are switching the state. The next thing is to listen to it and know when to show the list and when not. Okay, so first let me create a new component that I will switch between. So I'll go inside my component folder, create a new file called to do item form. Okay, and I'll create a new file called index.jsx. And I will just create my component. Again, it's just a function. So we are just importing React and then we are declaring our components. At the moment, I'm just returning this. I'll just create solid form goes here. Okay. We'll see later how to add the form. Now I just want to make sure my condition is working properly. Now I have my form. I'll just copy the name, rename, then go back to my to do. Okay. My to-dos. Now, what I want to do, first import this component from my to-dos, my to-do item form. Okay. So what I will do here, I will say, okay, when I do curly bracket like this, I will say when show form is true. Okay. So when it is true, I want to display my new component. Otherwise, I want to show my list. So cut this from here and put it there. And that's how you do one of the ways actually that you do your conditional rendering of your components. Okay, so basically you do a curly bracket, then your condition, whatever condition you have, if it's true, question mark, if it's true, show the first option. If this condition is false, then show the second option. Okay, let's try this. I'll just hard refresh. This is my list. Click add new item. Okay, my form goes here. Okay, later we see when we create the form and submit it how we can go back. But I'm happy with this. It is working as expected. We can also do profiling. Like we said, we want to make it as a habit. And I'll start profiling, add new item, stop profiling. And again, one comment, which is great. And it's only my to-dos components is re-rendering, and it says because hook number 2 this time has changed. Okay, and we said the hooks are in order, so this is hook 1 and this is hook 2. Okay, so it say hook number 2 has changed, which is true, because when I click add new item button, all what I'm doing is just setting this state to true. Okay, and you can see here, this is my new component, which is the form, which is now re-rendered. And when you say why this one re-rendered, it's because the first time the component had rendered. Okay, now let's create our first form, and it will be very basic form as this is a beginner course. Okay, we'll just give you some understanding how you can do some basic work with the forms. Okay, now let's do in the return function. So we'll be returning a native HTML form, simple as that. And inside our form, we just need one input field and we need one button as well. Okay, so let's add our input field, and that will be type of text and placeholder, enter to do title, and we will have also we need a handler. So whenever we type on this button, we need a handler to help us access that value. So it's called onChange, and I'll create a function for it. Okay, as I told you, I don't like inline functions at all. And just from experience, it creates a lot of issues later, even performance issues too. So I will go and declare it inside my functional component. I will call const and my function name I create. And this one by default will take an argument, which is your element. And we can for now just cancel log this element. Okay, let's save and let's go to our console. So already I can see a few things there. So if I write s, you can see here's your element. Okay, and you'll have something dot target, and then you can access the value of it. Okay, now there are a few things here when you work with forms. So first is that when you submit it, how you can access. So let's add also a button, and button will be type submit. Okay, and I would say add my to do. So when you do type submit, that means it will trigger the default submission behavior of the form. That means I need to go to the form and add another property called onSubmit. Okay, and I'll create a function for it called handle submit, which means I need to declare it as well. So const, and I will just for now add a cancel log call submitted. Okay, now let's try a few things. I want first to see, I'll show you an issue which happens when you click the button. So when I click this button, it will hard refresh my browser, okay? Which is not expected. I don't want my browser to hard refresh or reload, okay? And one thing with your React application, if you do so, all the data you have in your states will be lost, okay? So one thing you always have to do when you're using the default or the built-in form in HTML, you need to add an extra code lane here. Okay, so I will add E, which is your form elements, and then how to say E dot prevent default. Okay, so I don't want any default behaviors for my form to be triggered. When I save that, I'll click add new item. Then when I click now this button, I should not see my form hard reloading, and also I should see my console. So add new item. but still it is hard reloading. And that's of course because of my spelling mistake. So it should be prevent default. I'll save it, add new item, then click add my to-do, and there we go. It didn't hard reload. I still can see my form, and I can see my console here as well. Okay. Now let's go to how we can access the details we write here. So when you're typing in your input field, that value is not accessible by anywhere in your React application, okay? So what you have to do is that you have to store it again in some state so you can access it whenever you need it. So what we'll do, we'll import a state here, again use state, and we'll create a state here, const, call it title or value or anything you want, and set title, and then use state, and it will start with an empty string in beginning. Okay, it means empty, there is nothing. Then this title, I'll pass it as the value of my input field. So my input field should always read from my title. Okay, oops, title. And when I click handle on change, I need to set my state every time I type. So instead of cancel login now, I will say set title to e.target.value. Okay, so now all what I'm doing is that whenever I'm typing, I'm setting my state. Now let's go to our submission. So when I want to submit, I want to pass the value somewhere, right? Maybe you have an API call or anything, which I will not do now, but let's assume that. But all what I will do is just cancel log my title. Great. Now let's save all this and see if this is working or we are missing something. So I'll add let's subscribe and add my to-do. So there we go, submitted successfully, and I can see the value I'm getting from my state is same as the one I write there, which means it's working as expected. Now the next step is how we can then, when we click add my to-do, I want to switch my form, set this state again back to false, okay, and show my list again. Okay, now let's see how we can pass functions as properties for your child elements. Until now, we're just able to pass some values, like for example, objects. That's what we did until now. So let's see how we can pass a function. So we said here, when we click add my to-do, I want to be able to switch back to my list again, okay? Which means from my to-do item form, which is a child of my to-dos, I need to access a function, which is my setter function in my to-dos from a child component to change a state from the upper one, okay? So how we can do that, it's very simple and easy as well. So let's pass this setter function into my to-do item form. So call your property anything you like. I'll call it same, I'll keep them actually same. Okay, but this one you can call it anything you want, and this one is your actual set function from coming from your use state. Okay, now I need to add this property in my component. So I prefer again the structuring, so I don't write just props, but I'll write my actual property name right there. So whatever name you call it here, that's the name you'll add it right there. Okay, so what I want is that when my handle submit is successful, I want to switch from my form view to my list view. Okay, which means I need to set my show form state to false. So I'll say false and click save. Okay, now let's hard reload and start this from beginning. So add new item, let's subscribe and add to my to-do, and there we go. So it's working as expected. Now the other problem we can see is that when we go back, we are not seeing our new item, and that's because we didn't do anything with it yet. Okay, now let's see the new thing we need to do. So let's add new item. Let's subscribe, add my to-do. So my form is switching, which is great, but I don't see my new items. So let's see how we can do that. So basically, logically is that we have a different component that's where I'm setting the title value, right? So what I'm expecting is that when I close the form, my handle submits is triggered. I'm showing my state, I'm showing my list, so I'm hiding my form, and then I need to pass this value to our actual list of to-dos. Okay, I want to add this on the top. So we will do something similar to when we hard coded, but the steps are a little bit different because this time we are using a real-time data to add to our list. Okay, so first thing is that we need a way to pass data from down to up. Okay, so what I will do is that I will create a new function called handle adding new item. Okay, and this handling new item needs to be an arrow function to accept one argument, which is new to do. Okay, let's now cancel log new to do. And this function, I'll pass it as a property down to my to-do item form. Okay, so I'll say handle as, so this one call it anything you want again, but this new property for my to-do item form should point to this function here. Okay, and then we have to add this one in our child component. So let's add it to our prop handle add. So whatever name you do here, that's your property name, which goes there. Okay. So what I will do is when I do submission, instead of cancel logging my item, I want to send it back up. Okay. So I will do handle add title, and I'll remove these cancel logs. We don't need them anymore. So now what we are doing, we are passing this one back up to our to-dos, and let's save and see if we're getting our cancel log now, okay, in our parent component. So let's add new item. Hi, and let's clean our console, add my to-do. I'm switching. There we go. I can see my console coming now from my actual to-dos component. So, and the lane 34, which is lane 34. Great. Now, what I want to do is that when I receive the new item, I want to set it in my state so I can see it in my UI. Okay, until now I can't see it here. So the way we did before, it's same thing. It's just we have to add few more things like ID and the completion because we don't set it from the form yet. So I will copy same this thing we did before, paste it there, and comment it. So all what we are doing is just we're setting the state again, okay, with the previous list we had, then we added a new item. Only difference, this title will not be hard coded, okay, to be your new to do. And of course, because you added first time, your completed will be false. And I'm just adding a new ID 5. In other scenarios, you may have to use some ID generators in real-time applications. You can't hard code it like this. Or of course, if you're using an API call, you'll trigger an API, then you'll get back a response back with the actual ID. Okay, so I'll just save and then let's try again. I'll hard reload my application. And let's click add new item. Let's subscribe, add my to-do, and there we go. I can see it now, they're rendering in my list. Now let's do a little bit about conditional rendering. So one thing you'll notice is that when I click add new item, you'll see that this one's still visible here. It should not be visible here, okay? So whenever my form is visible, I don't want that to be visible. So when we did this conditioning here, I want this one to be part of my to-dos, okay? So I'll remove it from here. And I'll write it put it right. Let's save, and that's what's called refactoring. It's always, you pick up the last pieces in the end. Let's hard reload. That's my add new item. I'll click it. Let's subscribe. Let's subscribe completion. And my new item is added right now. Okay, great. We are going so far, so good. Okay, now let's go back to our to-do item component and let's see how we can clean up a little bit this function. So what I want to do now, this component, it's a functional component which is using state, but I want to turn it into something called pure component, okay, or pure functions, which means that these components, they don't have any state handling or anything like that. All what they do is just render some piece of UI, okay? That's it, nothing more than that. So what I want to do is this state's completion at the moment, it's just on this level, but it's not on the top level, okay? So whatever completion state, for example, for the first item, if I switch it, to be only switched within this level, okay? But my actual to-dos, this to-dos here, the value of completion of the first item will be still now false, okay? But in my local component, in the child component, it is true, okay? Which is not great. Usually your data have to be consistent, okay? So if I know this one is coming always from the parent, which is the source of the truth, should always hold the actual latest update of your data or whatever you call it. Okay. So what we want to do is, we don't want to do this handling of completion anymore from here, okay? So what I will do, I will remove all this, and is completed will not be there anymore. I will be reading just from my property, which is to do completed is completed. Okay, same here. To do is completed. And let's see if anything else I'm doing here. Okay, I'll keep the handle the on change function. Okay, because I need now. What I want to do is I want to change actually the upper component. And again, same thing we did before. We need to pass down a function that will help us. Maybe the first thing will come to your mind is passing the set to dos. Okay, so if I pass full the set to dos, still I need to do some handling and some, looping on and changing the values, okay? Which I don't want to do that inside my child component. So what I will do, same thing we did here, I'll create a new function, const, I'll say handle toggle completion of item, okay? And this should expect an item ID, okay? That's how I will know which item I should change the completion value, okay? So item ID, that will be your property. You can again call this anything you want. And for now, you just console log my item ID. And what we have to do now, we have to pass this one down to our components. Okay, so I will go to my to-do item and I'll pass a new property. I'll just say toggle completion. Okay, again, call this property anything you want, but make it sure it's pointing the function that you declared right here. Okay, now I added new properties. So of course, I have to add it in my child component that I'm passing to. So I'll go to my list of my props. I'll add it there. And I'll remove this use state here. I forgot to remove it. Let's clean up. Now what I will do is that I'll say when I do on change, I want to trigger this function. Okay. So I'll just declare here a new function called toggle. And this toggle is the one declared right there, okay? And all what I will do, I'll just declare, or I'll just trigger this function I'm passing as a property, and I'll pass my to-do dot ID. Okay, if you remember, it's expecting an ID, and I think that is the ID property name. Let me double check. So dot ID, okay? Now let's see if our property is going back up. Let's save our page and I'll clean up my console and let's take these. So I think first thing here, these things are not working because the property is completed. Okay, let me fix this. It's completed, it's just complete. Okay, now it's working. Okay, now let's check if our value is going back up. So I'll untick this one. And there we go. It's coming as expected. But C is not working yet because we didn't do anything. So what I will do now, I'll go back to my function here where I'll write all my logic to update my state. So the way you will do it is, of course, we have to call the setup function. So set to do's because we want to update our state. Okay. Now, before we just enter the new value, whatever values you want to update. But when you're adding or doing some deep checking and all that stuff, that is not safe, okay? You have to use something called a previous state, okay? So you make sure you are reading from the latest previous state and update it, okay? So basically our setter function now will accept an arrow function which have a default value called previous state, okay? Previous state. This property, again, you call it anything you want. It's just the way because it's meaningful, I'm calling it prev state, okay? Or I call it my prev to-dos, okay? To-do state, okay? To be more meaningful. So I'm accessing whatever the latest previous to-do state, okay? And then what I want to do is that I want to map through it because an array. So prev to-do state, okay? Dot map, okay? And this is basically just normal JavaScript. To do, because you're accessing your to-do item. And what you want to do is that check. If my to-do dot id, okay, is equal to whatever item id here, okay? So if it's equal to that id, then I want to render whatever my to-do I have now, okay? So for example, the title, your user ID, all that stuff. Then just one thing I want you to change is that completed property inside my object, okay? Which I want it to be opposite of whatever I have now in my to-do item, okay? Completed. Otherwise, if the IDs are not matching, just return whatever your item you have now. Save, and let's run this again. I'll just hard reload, and there we go. So we have first a problem here. It's saying we can't read properties of undefined, okay? So basically saying this to-dos is not defined. And let me see what I have done wrong here. So I think what I have done wrong, I have here extra curly bracket, which I should remove. So let me clean up that. Click save. And I have some extra thing also here. Okay, good. Now that's cleaned up. So all what we have done basically is that when we click on the checkbox, we are passing back up to our parent component ID of the item we want to toggle the completion. Then in there we have a function that pick up that ID and make sure it's going through the latest previous state, okay? Pick that up, then map through it because it's an array, okay? Then just compare the items IDs, okay? So anyone it is matching the ID we are passing from down, okay? Then just give us back the to do, but change the completed property to the opposite, okay? And if there is no matching, just give me back whatever items I have currently, okay? So I hope this makes sense. Now let's try this and see if it's working. Check. There we go. So it is working as expected. And if you remember the profiler thing we were talking about, so now you can see that when I check, you see this one, all thing is re-rendering behind the scene, okay? And also my single item as well. So there's no perfect scenario. Again, it depends on what you need of your organization, okay? So if you need for some scenarios update the parents, this is the way to do, okay? And there'll be other ways actually to prevent the child components from re-rendering if you don't have to. Now let's use actually the profiler and see how this is working. So clean off, start recording, check the first one, stop recording, and let's see what happened. So we have one commit, which is great. Not so many ways to rendering. We have my to-do item, okay, which is this one, which makes sense because we're changing the actual state, which is a hook within your component. Then we have actually the other components rendering also behind the scene, okay, which is not something I'll expect to happen. So even the memo here is not picking up the problem it is going on. And I can tell you why it's happening and how we can solve it. Now let me make this one big and let's try to profile again. So click the profiler, then just uncheck the first item, okay? And just when I do that, make sure you have eye on those highlights which is going behind the scene. There we go, and you can see it's going on each and every element and also the above scope as well. So I'm expecting that on the one on the wrapper, okay? I'm expecting around this item, but not on others. Now let's stop profiling and see why this one is happening. So good, one comment, as we said before. And this is the first one in my list. Okay, it say why it rendered, because your prop to do has changed, which is true. I changed the completed property inside my to do, and also says because my toggle completion has been changed too. Okay, and if you remember that toggle completion is a function we are passing from above parent component to my component. Okay, and why it says change is because I trigger it. If you remember, if you go to our component here, okay, I triggered the toggle completion. Okay, and what happened, it says, okay, because that has been triggered, it has been changed for some reason, but I'll go in details why really. If you see the next items which didn't do anything to them, to other list, let's pick up one of them. Okay, and when you click on it, it says why this rendered. It says because the prop changed toggle completion. So it's saying basically all other list items also the toggle completion has changed. Okay, so how a function can be changed? We know it is the same function. So what happened is that when we check or uncheck this checkbox, for example, okay, we are triggering an update of the state in our parent component. Okay, which means when we update the state, the parent component re-renders. Okay, therefore these functions will run again as well behind the scene. And what we'll do is that the function will be the same, but a new reference to these functions will be created. Therefore, the child components think, okay, this toggle component, or what are these functions we are passing down, okay? Handle toggle, or handle add item, or handle adding new item. It thinks that these functions really has changed. But actually they are same, it's only their reference has changed, okay? When the component re-rendered. So as useMemo do for us, or not useMemo, as the memo make a fix for us for the props comparison, there is a solution we can use for the functions as well. Okay, so when the reference only change, it doesn't mean they actually change, right? So I don't want my comment to re-enter. So what we can do is we can import something called useCallback, which is another hook, okay, which help us with memoizing these functions. And I don't want to go in depth about useCallback in this beginner video, but check out please my React hook playlist. Will be explained in details how these hooks work. So all what I have to do basically is that wrap my function inside this useCallback. Okay, so up to now, this is amazing. You're able to create a basic application that can fetch data from an API, render it, and add items to it as well. Now, there is a little problem here with our code if you want to see from the coding perspective, okay? So our component at the moment does a lot of logic for us, okay? So this to-dos component. And usually this is not a good practice. So we have a state management going here, then we had some functions, then we have this component rendering some JSX for us as well, okay? And this throws a problem which calls separation of concern, where your component is trying to do state manipulations and also rendering your UI. Okay, so there is a fix for this, and we can use something called custom hooks in React, which basically you build your own custom hook. Until now in this course, you're able to use the build ones in React, but what we'll do, we'll try to create our own custom hook that will handle fetching the data for us and also setting the state as well. Okay, so how we can do that? We can go to our project. We will not use the component folder. We'll use a new structure. We'll create a new folder under source called hooks. Okay, and again, this is not a rule really, but this is just a ways of working. Okay, and make sure your project structure is clear. So under the hook, I'll create a new file which is a hook. I'll call use to dos. Again, any hook you create should start with a use keyword, okay? That should not be .jsx, it should be just .js. So let me fix this first. And what we can do here, we can declare our function, which will be the hook. So const, and the hook always should start with a use keyword. I'll say it's use to dos. And that will be an arrow function. Then inside here, we will be doing the state management and data fetching. Okay, so whatever we're doing here. So I'll copy this lane now from here. I'll paste it right there. And same for my use effect, I will just remove it from here as well. Let me remove this comment here. And now we have to import the use state and the use effect from React. So import first React and then use state and use effect from React. Okay, great. Now our custom hook, now it will not return for us a JSX because this is a custom hook, but return for us whatever things we need. So we need now in our component, we need of course to access the state, okay? And also we need that setter function to access as well. So what I will do here, I'll just go back and return both my state to-dos and also my setter function, which is set to-dos. Click Save, go back to my component. I'll just remove the use effect now because I don't need it. And what I will do, I'll come right here. I'll say const, and I'll try to access my custom hook that I create, use to do's. And I have to import it. Import use to do's from. So we said it's from the hooks folder and use to do's. Let's save this. And what we'll access here, we'll access these two properties, so to-dos and set to-dos, and set to-dos as well. Let's save and let's see if our UI is still working. Okay, so it is complaining, okay, and saying that this use to-dos, it's not a function. It is for a simple reason is that I created my custom hook, but I did not export it. So export default my use to-dos. Save. Let's go back to our UI, and there we go. Okay, so we can see our list coming. Let's try even add a new item. New, add my to-do, switching, and I can see my item right there as well. So here, this is where the custom hooks can come very handy for you. Okay, so basically the custom hooks, again, they are just other functions in React that can help you to manage the separations of concern and make your actual component that render a UI for you more readable and less complex as well. So it may look scary, like first time when these custom hooks came in, I was like so scared even to try it out. But as soon as you start using it, it will be your best friend through your development lifecycle as well. Okay, now let's add some more things to our custom hook, okay? So let's say, for example, if you go back to our UI, and let's hard refresh. And when I do so, for a few maybe milliseconds or a second, you will see that add new item is there, but under it is empty. And it's like take few milliseconds or a second, it depends on your API call, to see the list again. Okay, so let's see that. Okay, I hope you noticed that. So it takes a little bit time to show after our UI is very visible. And why that is happening is that because in first time your component renders, of course, you don't have any data, and you trigger your API call, okay, that will go and call this data from some server somewhere, and then respond back, and then you get it, and then you set your state, and then you display it, okay? So in real-time applications, of course, you need to handle this time. Okay, you have to show, for example, a loader or some spinner or anything like that, or a messaging saying that, okay, wait, we are loading something for you. So how we can do that is that we can add a new state, okay? Say const and call this state, for example, loading or is loading or anything you like. And we need a setup function, set loading. Use state, and it will be initially true. And why I'm setting initially to true is that because my component render first time, this API will be triggered, right? So my loading from the first time will be true. I don't have any data yet. And what I will do is that when my data is retrieved successfully, I want to set my loading to false. Okay? to false, or actually before to do's. And I want to make this loading state available to my component, so I'll make sure that I import it. Oops, I'll just say loading, save, then go back to my component and try to access that new state I added. And now what you can do usually in your UI, it depends on what is the requirement for UX. But for now, I'll just say if my loading state is true, okay, then just display a text saying loading. Okay, and let's try this one out. Let's go back to our UI and let's hard reload. Let's hard reload again. So I don't see it. So what I will do, I'll just add a timer so we'll be able really to see the difference. And here I forgot also one thing is that I didn't do a return. So that's one reason really the actual problem. We're not seeing it even flickering. So let's go back to our browser, hard reload, and we can see that is loading. And then we can see our list, okay? So this is a very powerful thing. So all the life cycle of even your API calls, you can have a status, to store the status of your API calls. Even if there's an error, you can, for example, add a new state, okay, in here, and you can call it error, set error, and then here you'll have a try-catch block, and then you can add a block where in the cache if there's an error, just set the set error, okay? And then you pass that error down back to your component. And then if there's an error, then maybe you want to take them to another screen or you want to display a message saying try again or anything you want, okay? Maybe feel free to go on your own and try this out at your end. Now, let's remove this set timeout from here. I don't want it. I don't want it. Let's save, go back to our UI, hard reload, and you see it's quick showing, and then our text is showing. So that's how you can handle the loading state.